Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today. Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio, radio, no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast, as you're driving along in your car or your truck, or put in those earbuds and take it all in while you're on public transport. In this essay, I'd like to talk about democracy and how it's under attack. And just the definition of democracy for the purpose of this essay, at least, is the expression of the will of the people. The people vote to select their government. Now, whether it's done through outright majority or through a Republican system or whatever, it's the right of the people to vote to select their government, and an expression, of course, of the will of the people. Now, democracy is under attack, given that definition. Democracy is under attack from all sides. The globalists now control pretty much every institution, whether it be in academia, media. They control the party administrative machinery of all the major political parties across the Western world. So they're in pretty much complete control. They decide what candidates can stand for political office. They decide what the narrative is going to be. They decide the policies. They decide everything. There's very little that's left now for governments governments of any persuasion or anywhere to decide. Should a politician accidentally manage to get in who isn't fully on board with the globalist project, then the globalists will remove them one way or another. An elected prime minister in Australia who was, somewhat on board with the globalist project, but wasn't as ardent in its support as the globalists wanted. They just got rid of him. He just wasn't on board enough with the climate change stuff, and they wanted someone who was more into climate change hysteria. So they just went to his colleagues remember, this is an elected prime minister. They just went to his colleagues in the government and said, "You got to get rid of this guy and put this guy in." And just the globalists have that sort of power. Look what's happening in the United Kingdom. The globalists can decide who sits in the prime minister's chair, for how long they'll stay there, what they have to say and do, what their policies will be. And so the globalist control is near absolute. Now, the trouble the globalists have got is the people in the West aren't going along with it. There's nothing in it for the West. The average Western citizen who's not on the globalist payroll and not on the take is nothing. Globalization offers them nothing. It offers them reduced living standards, a bleak future, an unpromising future, maybe a futile future. Certainly, in many cases, it does. So the globalists have to, because the globalists can't sell it. It's an unsaleable project. They can sell it through bribery, but other than that, they can't sell it to anybody. Sure, third world illiterate peasants like the idea that they're going to go to a rich first world country because of all the handouts, but the indigenous people of the West, the people of the generations, people who built the West and created the West, and its advanced technology and so on, then they're the ones that are the big losers here, and they're the ones that are not supporting globalization or what the globalists are doing. So the globalists have to shut them up and have to now make sure that any expression of the will of the people is either watered down or undermined, subverted, or eradicated altogether. So that's what they're about, and this is why. Because as long as democracy, as in the people get to choose their government, as long as the rule of law, due legal process, independent institutions, as long as that structure exists, the globalists cannot achieve a total takeover, which is what they insist they must do, and are working aggressively towards. So they have to get rid of all these things, and naturally destroying and undermining and preventing the will of the people from being expressed is one of these things, and it's key, because if the people can select who they want as a government, then the globalists lose their power or much of it. The globalists must have their chosen candidates in government positions and in government power as judges and so on and so forth. They must have their people in there. And if they haven't, then it just makes it far more complicated for the globalists and far more difficult. For example, if an ardent nationalist who believes in his own people and his own country becomes prime minister or president or whatever, then that's a direct threat to the globalist project, and they can't allow that to happen. They must stop it. Now, if that involves rigging elections, if it involves assassination, if it involves corruption, if it involves all sorts of whatever they can do to stop that from happening. I just used the example of Liz Truss in the UK. the fact, in my view at least, the fact that somebody like Liz Truss was prime minister in itself was a joke, but nonetheless, she was elected by the party membership. That was a democratic process. Liz Truss was elected by the party. This is the Tory party membership in Britain. Was elected by the party membership. She is a legitimate prime minister. And again, whether you think she's an idiot or not, that's beside the point. She was a legitimate prime minister. But the globalists just decided, no, don't care. She's out. We don't want her. We want someone who's not elected. We want our own man in there, and that's it. We want our own stooge boy, our own little stooge flunky boy in there who's going to do what we tell him to do. And which Rishi Sunak dutifully did. Super turbocharged mass migration, which is what the globalists wanted, which is what they're doing all over the Western world. Liz Truss wasn't into that to the same extent. She just wasn't going along with what the globalists wanted. So they got rid of it. From the time they decided they couldn't control it, the time she was gone, I doubt it is more than a couple of days, a few days at most. That's the power these people have. Now, they can use all sorts of coercions. They can make all sorts of threats. They can say, listen, if you don't do what we want, we'll create a run on the currency, and the country will be ungovernable. You either do what we want, or we'll get rid of you. And all sorts of threats, coercions, and thuggery, and so on goes on. So I just want to sort of illustrate the power. Now, coming to the US 2020 presidential election, here's a guy who, the globalist candidate, Biden. He can barely string a sentence together, even in 2020. If they, inject him with enough juice, they can probably get him through like about an hour. And if he gets a lot of protection from, say, interviewers and other people like that, he can maybe last that thing. But Biden could barely string a sentence together. Didn't campaign at all. And is a lousy campaigner and speaker as well, and yet somehow he gets the most votes in the history, the most popular president ever in the history of the United States. A guy who didn't campaign, who couldn't even put a sentence together or struggled to put a sentence together, and that's the guy who's the most popular president in history. So somewhere they cooked up and invented in the region of 20 million votes for their candidate, their boy. Now, this is the power they have. Imagine the level of subversion, the amount of people that have to be subverted and corrupted in order to do that. That's insane. And yet there you are. There's the evidence in front of us. So we need to understand the effort that the globalists are going to. The recent assassination attempt on Donald Trump, for example. The endless array of media hit pieces against Trump that are hysterical nonsense. You struggle to find a single fact in there that's worthwhile, and yet the tirade against Trump continues. All of it from globalist controlled and globalist directed media outlets. So quite apart from rigging elections and subverting elections, from getting rid of people they don't like who have been elected by the people. Making sure only their own candidates stand, and so on. This is how the globalists are, and they're seriously angry and annoyed and irritated that the people are putting up a fight. They didn't really expect quite this much. Now the fight is I think the fight back against the globalists is overall pretty lukewarm, but nonetheless the globalists are irritated beyond belief that they can't just ride roughshod over these people who they deride as being, high school dropouts and, people that stay in 2-star hotels, don't have jobs for life, where they do nothing but get paid a lot, and these sort of things. That's the mark of a good globalist. Hey, I got a job that pays me shitloads of money. I got to do absolutely nothing other than fillet the globalist stooges. and don't do any work, and gee whiz, I'm so superior. So these are the sort of people that the globalists have installed in whether it be academia or institutions like museums and so on. But this is how democracy is being sort of chipped away. Now, I've just was reading earlier on today that in Germany they've just decided to cancel books that they don't like. This is a book that by an American politician that talks against globalization and puts forward, I think, fairly cogent arguments against it. Talks about mass migration, this sort of thing. The Germans have decided that no, we're not going to allow that book to be distributed. So when you have basic freedoms, such as freedom of the press, and these are the same people that scream about censorship. The Nazis, they censored book, this sort of thing, and they're doing it themselves. But it's okay when we do it. When they do it, it's bad. But when we do it, it's all right. And in France, they're shutting down a TV station that is not in support of globalization. So they're tightening the screws all over. You're not allowed to hear, see, read, or view things that the globalists don't approve of. But that to me indicates how unsaleable the globalist project is. People aren't buying it. It's bullshit. It offers nothing. The globalists can't sell it because it's not saleable. So the only thing they can do is censorship, election rigging, and stacking and undermining and subverting all the institutions. But every institution that's there to protect democracy and the will of the people, they've got rid of pretty much every one of those institutions, or subverted or undermined them, or stacked them with activists. It doesn't really matter. You can go into an election officer in anywhere in the Western world and say, look, I want you to count these illegitimate votes as real. I want you to fraudulently do this. Flagrantly break the election laws, and the people go, yeah, okay, yeah, all right, and maybe they get bribed or paid or gifts. Their kids go to a prestigious university on a scholarship that magically appears. I'm sure there's something in it for them, but how easily they can sell out their own people in their own country. I never even thought that was possible. But there you go. This was one of the things throughout history where the West, before nationalism, the Western world had some. When the Mongols were invaded, you wouldn't call it West, you call it Central Europe. But when the Mongols invaded Eastern and Central Europe, why did the Mongols win so many victories? Was it because they were they were formidable in their own way with all those horse soldiers and the reticulated bow and all this sort of stuff. So they had but the reality was the squabbling amongst the European principalities and fiefdoms and regions and areas. The squabbling was such that they could have a falling out sort of hours before the battle with the Mongols would start, and half the army could just wander off and go, no, screw you. And so the Mongols were gaining victories because they were unified and the Central Europeans were not. Whenever the Central Europeans were unified, the Mongols were defeated. So trying to break a society apart is also the globalists' shtick. They import millions of people that just don't want to assimilate for all a variety of reasons, whether they be religious or otherwise. And this creates divisions in society, which the globalists ruthlessly exploit, thereby weakening our society in the West and giving the globalists, as they would see it, a better chance of taking control. But we should all sit back and just look at the many ways that the globalists are subverting the will of the people. One of the more recent ones is that if you're against globalization, you're a demagogue. Or question it, you're a demagogue, thus far right, thus Nazi, thus so on. But if you're for globalization, then you're one of the good people. And this demagogue term is being used. Demagogue being this the idea that you appeal to the populist sentiments and prejudices of the people that vote. So if you run around saying everyone's a neo-Nazi fascist, then you're a good person. That's not exploiting prejudices. But if you say mass migration, it doesn't work, and these people don't assimilate, then you're a demagogue and thus a Nazi, this sort of thing. It's insane, but that's where we're at in the Western world today. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.